The only thing we can be sure of about the future is that it will be absolutely fantastic. So, if what I say now seems to you to be very reasonable, then I'll have failed completely. Only if what I tell you appears absolutely unbelievable have we any chance of visualizing the future as it really will happen.
Hello, and welcome to Arthur C. Clarke Presents metaFUTURES, an exploration of what the metaverse is and what it may mean for the world to come. I'm your host, Patrick Coleman, and along with the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination and the Origami Air Co., we're very excited to have you with us as we explore the limits of the possible when it comes to the metaverse. To begin our journey, if you want to follow me outside, we're going to get on the airship to our first destination.
Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us here at Compassion Beach in the Meta-Pacific. Compassion Beach was built in collaboration with the Arthur C. Clarke Foundation and is currently being used to run trials and teach compassion here in the Metaverse. How amazing is that? I'm here with Greg Delaune from the Deep Blue Institute. And Greg, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you guys do there?
Sure, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. It's great to be here, and appreciate all the hard work you all put into to make all this happen. So yeah, Deep Blue Institute is a bit of a think tank and consulting firm. We're based out of New Orleans, and the activities of Deep Blue Institute come out of my previous work with the Seasteading Institute and with Blue Frontiers that was working on a prototype floating city for French Polynesia. Since that time, I've moved back to my native New Orleans, so I'm originally from here. And I also have a background in public-private partnerships for green cities and smart cities. So we are working on diversifying the regional economy of Louisiana to diversify away from petroleum and tourism and towards technologies and systems that will be helpful in fighting land loss, coastal loss, and the effects of climate change and sea level rise. So looking at a number of different technology verticals, but generally looking at what are the ways that Louisiana and New Orleans in particular can lead in the startup space, in the blue technology space, and in all the support services of education, vocational training, et cetera, that are going to be needed to build out the blue economy around the world.
Amazing. What would you say is something you're doing that is absolutely unbelievable?
Well, the unbelievable stuff is going to be the real floating cities and floating infrastructure. Having said that, the Dutch really are already doing a lot of this. So a little bit later, we can take a look at a flyover of some work we did in French Polynesia. But I think otherwise, in the Louisiana area, we're getting the conversation started on how we can get multiple benefit streams from coastal restoration. So as we're doing wetland restoration, we can be using wastewater, municipal wastewater, to grow those wetlands, to grow biomass, and then be creating blue carbon credits that are then sold on the emerging carbon market. So the idea is to have a whole bunch of different benefit streams coming out of these different activities, including those that relate to education and economic development, so that we're creating opportunities for young people and students and young professionals and entrepreneurs in southern Louisiana.
You know, specifically based on the history of some of these communities, you could very well say that is unbelievable based on the historics of the opportunities that have been there before. And I think it would really help our audience and our members to see this flyover and for us to check this out if that's possible, for sure.
Yeah, let's go ahead and
I
do
believe
that.
we have some footage of that.
So I understand that we won't be able to see it like the audience is seeing, so maybe we can just, if somebody can let us know when it's playing.
It's up. All right.
Yeah,
Sounds
great.
like it's up.
All right, so yeah, so basically what you're looking at is some work that was done by Blue 21, which is a Dutch engineering firm that was working with the Seasteading Institute and with Blue Frontiers on this prototype seastead proposal for French Polynesia. So we were talking to the government there. It was not actually built. There was a change in the government and the project stalled. But this gives you an idea of the sorts of work that Blue 21 is doing. And I think a key thing is that this type of work, it's really important that it's customized to the local culture, the local environment. So this was, Blue 21 did a great job of designing this as informed by French Polynesian culture, the particulars of the site as it relates to prevailing winds, sun angles, and in particular shadow patterns on the bottom of the lagoon, so that we didn't have shadows all of the time in one particular area, such that we were doing damage in the lagoon. So for this project, we were committed to having a net positive impact on the lagoon. And this platform is actually 12 platforms linked together, and this is for a community of about 250 people by design.
That's definitely unbelievable, and I love that it's really inclusive of the communities that it's serving. I think meeting people where they're at is absolutely one of the most important things that any innovation, any solution can possibly do. You know, it's one thing to come up with a new technology, and it's completely different to come up with a new technology that can be adopted and has an easy entry for buy-in, I think. And I think you guys are doing a really good job of that.
Yeah, well, one of the things that we're focused on, because all this stuff is sort of systems of systems, and the economic development component is really crucial. So New Orleans is actually suffering from a crime wave, like many communities around the country. And some of the people I'm working with at the data center, which is a local research and data analysis group, was looking at the crime statistics and what are the real solutions. And really the only solutions, there are no short-term solutions. The long-term solutions are creating opportunity, are dealing with poverty. So the only way to do that is really with jobs and training and all that. So that's part of what we're trying to participate in, is creating job opportunities through new technology development and new sectors of industries that will be critical for communities around the world that are trying to deal with coastal land loss and climate change.
And what's really cool too is you're training the existing community. You're not necessarily flying people in from other places and replacing and giving those opportunities. You're helping people really evolve the community and the jobs that are coming up, right?
Yeah,
I think that's
yeah,
really important. Those opportunities for the locals.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, one of the opportunities that we're working on is actually VR related. So we're trying to build on what are the strong points of New Orleans, and as the people recognize from around the world, the strong point, one of the key strong points of New Orleans is music and the entertainment industry and tourism. So building on that, we're working on a virtual reality prototype project with some of the local venues, so that we can start to build out that sector as well. So that's not directly related to the seasteading and to the water, but in the long tail of that is actually the use of VR technologies and blockchain for the management and monitoring of projects that are sequestering carbon and restoring habitats, et cetera. So those will be assets that'll be monitored and metered in the spatial web, and that will be some of the critical technologies and new jobs that'll be created. So with the music industry as a strong point, as an anchor, that's the beginning of that training and sector build out, is to have folks working in the music industry with VR technologies.
That's awesome. Now, as you're creating all these jobs and opportunities and nourishing the ecosystems, how are you making sure that you're nourishing justice along the way with your projects and your ecosystems?
Yeah, well, that's, I think, where the engagement with the local institutions come in. So the public-private partnership component of this is working with local universities, local government, and the local communities along the bayou, along the coast. So this type of education and training would include K through 12, as well as universities and PhD students who can be working on dissertations that are related to some of these technologies, and then the entrepreneur space. So New Orleans has an emerging startup and entrepreneur space that is going quite well. They just had the New Orleans Entrepreneur Week a few weeks ago, and they talked about New Orleans being 20 years into a 40-year cycle that some people claim is sort of what it takes for a city or a region to become a startup hub. So we've got some good start with that, with some big exits like Lucid and Turbo Squid. And Turbo Squid, many of you may be familiar with, is a 3D asset company. So working with these sorts of companies and the different education components, what we at Deep Blue Institute would like to see is that we will have 8-year-olds, 11-year-olds that are in these bayou communities that are potentially disappearing with all of their special French Cajun language and Zydeco music and cuisine, et cetera. We may have 8 and 11-year-old and students that are designing their floating home, their floating school, their floating infrastructure, and are growing up. We're growing a next generation of people that are really immersed in the solution generation set and having a vision for what coastal areas around the world can do to survive climate change and sea level rise. And then ultimately, those future generations will be skill sets and human resources that we can export to other parts of the world. And Louisiana already has experience with that, because if you went to the oil fields and the oil platforms during a century ago, during the 1960s and 70s, you would run into the team leaders of Roughnecks, et cetera, that are from southern Texas, southern Louisiana. So we can do all that again, except this time it's going to be with regenerative marine technologies, and it's going to be through this full community engagement and ultimately cultural preservation for these communities that otherwise will disappear as the waters rise.
That is so wonderful to hear, that the communities themselves have a voice and will be represented in their own way. I think that that's just super wonderful. And to speak to that and to speak to the hopes of the future, voices of that future and the people who will be influencing it, I think it's really good to bring in our next guest, Ivan Winkler, who is on the ground and is an educator and an Alaskan fisherman. And I really think that that will bring us to some really cool conversations about these Bayou communities. So let's go ahead and fly Ivan in. Thank you so much for all your information, Greg, and I can't wait to get this convo going here.
Great.
Hello.
How you doing?
Hi, Ivan.
I'm doing well.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be here. Absolutely happy to be here.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about what you do in your daily life. You do some pretty unbelievable stuff.
Well, I do wear a couple different hats. During the school year, I am a high school English teacher, and work doing that is all-consuming, time-consuming. If you know any teachers, you know how that is. And in the summer times, I am continuing to go up to Alaska to fish and it's been a part of my life for well over 20 years now, and I absolutely love it. And it gives me a lot of perspective having those two worlds. Sure. So I
That's
guess,
incredible.
yeah. So I guess what I love about it is, I mean, one of them keeps me in shape for one. The other one keeps my mind in shape. I really get pushed to the limits in both of them, but I guess they're both, in my mind, sustainable careers for the time being. I'm a salmon fisherman, so our fishery is different than a lot of the other ones that are out there. Um, it renews itself naturally when taken care of. So, it's been fished heavily for um, dozens of years, and we're still getting record runs back because it's, when taken care of, a very lucrative fishery.
That's very
So,
interesting.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, fisheries are also being constructed sustainably within the Deep Blue Institute model as well, right, Greg?
Yeah, that would be one of the verticals that we're looking at. So we're as the institute wants to promote really anything that can thrive in these sorts of coastal environments. So whether it's we're saying blue technology, blue industry, so that's really anything that's touching the water. So that could be energy, it could be offshore wind, it could be different types of algae farming, fish farming, new technologies for. There's some cool stuff going off the coast of Hawaii where they're using big buckyballs that have fish populations in them, and they drift with the current so that the waste is being distributed across the ocean. So Ivan may know about that stuff, but we're really interested in anything that can improve water quality, restore habitats, help the fishing industry, et cetera, and at the same time build those industries and create economic opportunity for the folks that are working in those industries.
Absolutely. I love that focus on those coastal areas, and the opportunities there are huge. I mean, we're dismantling a lot of dams in the Pacific Northwest to try and rejuvenate some of these natural salmon runs, but where that hydroelectric energy goes away, there's things going on, especially right now around um, United Kingdom and some of those waters where they're getting energy from tides and using the ocean in ways to create that energy. Farms, as a fisherman, have historically been something that I resisted against. But the fact is that some of the new designs, like what you're talking about in Hawaii, really are sustainable and can help to, especially with those populations of fish that need help or have been or are facing changes that we have no control over. So there is a lot of really neat opportunities there, without a doubt. There's also where I'm from, up in Alaska, there are a couple groups that are blazing the trail in kelp farming, which is just one of the things that happens so easily and readily in the ocean that as of yet has not been tapped into in the way that it could be. I mean, and that's wonderful not only for the product that it is, but the amount of carbon dioxide that is uh, just eaten up by surface level seaweed and other organisms. It's really kind of exciting.
Yeah,
That
that's
brings us to a really. Go ahead, Greg.
yeah. I was just gonna reinforce what I've been saying. So one of the things that I've been learning about, and I'm constantly learning a million things. That's one of the funnest things about my job is I'm working with all these amazing experts like Ivan and different people in different verticals. Is this idea that if you're sequestering carbon, that a marine environment is sequestering on average, is sequestering 10 times the carbon of a land-based environment. So unfortunately, we can't grow kelp in the Gulf. So we're looking at seaweed and algae and those sorts of things. And I'm sure Ivan can comment on that in terms of that. feasibility, but that again potentially is an industry sector. So we envision that maybe someday there would be family scale subsistence farming of algae that could be used for creating biofuels, for creating food supplements, et cetera, as well as the sort of wetland restoration and that kind of carbon sequestration that can produce that kind of 10x carbon sequestration, and then again produce carbon credits that are another benefit stream of those activities.
So this is truly incentivizing greener ways of doing things and feeding your community and really the ecosystem that you're living in, right? Trying to make a smaller impact, but also improve it or make it better than you found it. I'm curious, Ivan, how are you seeing like students evolving and like what are their career goals lately? Like, is there, do you see an opportunity between the two of you, a good way for students to go like from high school to these new jobs, or will they have to have like specialized skills?
Well, I feel lucky to be in an area that I am. We have a lot of projects that do get students out in the field, restorative projects. We have several clubs that have the opportunity to go out and plant trees in areas that need to be rejuvenated. There's students that are working in engineering areas that are focused on futures engineers. So there is opportunities. I think that especially with the STEAM movement of trying to integrate science, technology, and everything else, it is very forward thinking. We're trying to find as many ways to give them those opportunities as we can. And one of the nice things about it is that it's an unknown. So it's an experience within an experience. We're mapping it as the students are discovering it. But, and I mean, a lot of this is not going to be found in a typical four-year university either. I think a lot of it is going to be mix of that engineering and technology and the high end of technology. I mean, I have kids that I have to take their computers away because they won't stop coding. This is the level of interaction that these students are going to be a part of. So when you interact that with real world mechanisms that are taking place, yeah, it's like trying to predict what something's going to look like. And I think it's pretty exciting. And I think that it's going to have a lot of avenues for people to kind of get that experience. At least that's my hopes.
Well, that's great. I agree. I mean, with Nambar, pretty much the whole philosophy behind this restaurant is to give back to the ecosystem, to eat invaders, and to create jobs, and to really try to hire people who are passionate about the food system, but also want to make sure that they preserve it. And I think that for a long time, culinarily, we've taken and made scarcity and made rarity such a big deal that we've pretty much pillaged, and it's time to kind of like really give back on the plate somehow. So I'm also very, very curious to see how the different passions and the different like interests that students will drive the career fields and the trades that they choose to go into. I mean, we're seeing a lot of kids go and do the van life or do like a lot of like finding yourself before they go to college. And so I think those things are having these opportunities and institutes and all of this these ecosystems that they can now go into, I think are completely new opportunities that I definitely didn't have growing up as a self-taught chef who had to kind of like work my way up the whole way and find people who were willing to teach and let me experiment was hard enough. But like I think what you guys are both doing and encouraging these new pathways is really important.
Yeah, definitely. It's so a little bit to the economic component of this and the jobs that you asked about. some of the things that we think about is globally 3 billion people are dependent on marine and coastal areas for their livelihood. And what we're hearing is that the marine biotechnologies market is worth $2.8 billion right now, with projected growth of 10 to 12% annually. So that's a real opportunity in terms of not just individual types of jobs or in a four-year education or a high school education, but really a whole new way of looking at blue economies. And Middlebury Institute is in 2020 developed an ocean climate action plan they called the Blue New Deal. It was basically in reaction to the Green New Deal that was being discussed in Congress. And it's all about that. It's all these different parts and levels of the economy, blue collar jobs, professionals, engineers, et cetera. All these coastal areas, there's going to be tremendous opportunities, and it's not wherever you can enter and with whatever level of skills, et cetera. Just like we're seeing in solar installation and all sorts of things, there's going to be lots and lots of ways to reconceptualize our interaction with the ocean and how we're creating economy around that is a regenerative approach to economic development.
That's wonderful. And a lot of those feed into each other and essentially just keep nourishing the system in circles, right? Where you finally have an ecosystem that can work, and everything is unbelievable until it's done. And it looks like we're all just moving forward and building these dreams, and we're not alone here, is what I'm really learning, is that we all have really cool intermingling goals and missions, and if we continue doing our work together, I think we can truly continue to nourish justice and sustainability and keep eating deliciously along the way, hopefully. Right?
Absolutely.
Well, thank you both for joining me. It's been super wonderful to have you both here. And I mean, we've got a pretty good audience here that probably wants to ask you some questions. So if you guys are good with it, I'd love to open it up to some Q&A with our crew.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Anybody got any questions or any?
Use the hand emoji above your head, and then we'll call on you.
Oh, there we go. Hey, Patrick.
Hi, thank you so much for this really inspiring conversation. And I guess my question, I'm just thinking, about the work that the three of you have done, and so often when we are kind of imagining future scenarios, our imagination is such a powerful tool, but kind of in keeping with the theme nourishing social justice, we can kind of forget that we're people with bodies, and that people with bodies are going to have to do these different jobs and live in these different places. And so I would just kind of be curious to hear your ideas, thoughts, perspectives about, in a world where these technologies and these ecosystems and structures are more fully deployed, what is, like for you, Ivan, like what would the life of a seasonal fisherman be like on a seastead in the Gulf Coast, for example? Or what are these new jobs? What are they going to ask of people that's different today, and how does that in turn sort of shape your visioning for what these systems can enable, both economically and ecologically, but personally, for the people who are going to inhabit this world?
Certainly, and thank you. That's an excellent question. And I think when it comes to fishing, the sustainability of the fishery itself is something that I'm constantly impressed by. However, the modernization of how we're fishing for them, I mean, the simple fact is less boats we use, the better it is, because the less impact we're making on the environment where we're taking the fish. That being said, my number one factor in judging a fishery on its sustainability, one of my biggest factors is the amount of bycatch. which is the other fish that you catch in the process of targeting your fish. That's why I love salmon fishing. There's very little, if any, bycatch as we're fishing. A lot of other fisheries can't say that. So as we do that, though, it is going to diminish the amount of people that are harvesting the fish. So as far as a huge industry, that's going to be less of one. However, how that fish moves throughout our world market, that is definitely changing. And one of the most exciting things is cutting out some of those large corporate middlemen that have been making it more and more difficult for fishermen to have a life. We're seeing, I mean, if you think about a company such as Trader Joe's, which is just one example, but what they have done, they've blazed a trail of making or giving food providers access directly to the source instead of through all of this other chain where we don't know what we're getting. Population is getting more and more literate about our food. So as that literacy develops, the jobs on how that's going to work, who is going to provide those direct connections? And these are people that could, I mean, one thing that COVID has taught us, as well as just the 21st century, we can do so much from hundreds, if not thousands of miles away. So you can have somebody in Salinas, Kansas that is directly interacting with Gulf Coast fishermen and a grocery store in Minnesota. So we have this possibility of modernizing that. And some industries are probably not going to be hugely sustainable as far as massive amounts of employees. Then again, other ones are going to pop up along the way that are going to take like-minded people and fill in those gaps.
That's awesome.
Follow me, please.
Any other
thank you.
questions?
Absolutely. Wonderful question.
Max, you have a question?
Hello. Wonderful conversation this evening. So stoked to hear both of your perspectives. I just love the balance tonight. Really, really inspiring. But I must admit, occasionally I feel a bit I feel as humans, we are sometimes attracted to quite grandiose and complex solutions to, we want to treat a problem with essentially kind of the equivalent of medication rather than tackling it at its source. And I feel like sometimes some of these really ambitious plans that those optimists like us are rallying around neglect maybe that if we consumed as much fish as we did a generation ago, or if we traveled as much as we did a generation ago, or if we lived the way that we did 2 generations ago, we wouldn't have to address them in such complex ways. And by the way, I'm someone who is attracted to the complex solutions. How do you kind of stay motivated to solve these problems? Like, apologies to bring a pinch of like pessimism to the conversation, but
You need it. I think that's excellent, and you always need to stay grounded. Would you like to answer, or I don't want to talk over you?
One thing I do want to say is that from
Please.
working in social justice is that it is very long game work. And I think Greg spoke to that a few times, and I'm excited to actually hear him answer this question. Can you hear us, Greg?
Can you hear me?
I can hear.
Yes.
I can hear Greg.
You can hear me now? Okay,
Yes.
we're good? Okay. So, yeah, I mean, the big sexy stuff is the floating cities, floating infrastructure, retooling an entire economy, et cetera. But the work that we're doing and where I come from is long-range planning stuff. So we're really looking at what does the world look like 30 to 50 years from now. And one thing which probably a lot of people here appreciate is that if we were to magically flip a switch and not release any more carbon into the air right now, we still have like a 30-year plus tab to pay. So fundamentally, the work that Deep Blue is doing in Louisiana is developing adaptive technologies. How can low-lying coastal communities and island nations adapt to the realities that are going to be happening in the coming years? And for these communities in the bayou, for instance, Plaquemine Parish is the last parish. We have parishes here in Louisiana instead of counties. The last parish along the Mississippi. Plaquemine Parish has already lost 50% of its landmass in the last couple decades or so. And the Louisiana coast is losing a football field of land every hour and a half. So these are real-time problems that we need to be dealing with. And the incremental steps of doing things like sediment restoration, so sediment projects where we're opening up holes in the levee, we're opening up the levees to restore the sediment cycles of the Mississippi. That's just one example of a whole bunch of real projects that are going on right now and having real impacts on the local community. And they're really hard because you're changing saltwater environments into brackish or freshwater environments and changing, I can speak to, what does that mean in terms of a change in fish species or shrimp and crawfish and all that sort of a thing. So there are things that are happening right now, and the state government and local communities are doing their best to adapt. But these communities are disappearing right now. So we have to help them right now and deal with those sorts of near-term solutions, and then also be planning for these 30, 50-year solution sets that will not only help our own communities, but again, can help communities around the world and take charge of the development of those technologies that ultimately will be very expensive. So the technologies the Dutch developed 500 years ago to deal with flood control and have been selling for the last 300 years are very lucrative technologies. So it's much better to be developing those and selling them and sharing them rather than having to go buy them from other sources, particularly if it's outside the country. I hope that's a bit of an answer there, Max.
Yeah, fabulous answer. Thank you.
It's really good to know that it's not just the grandiose visions and ideas. It's incorporating real life solutions and whatever we can do immediately, right, to continue to keep the locals buying into these new systems, right? If they can't eat off this new system, they're not going to do it. So
and there's a lot of jobs. There's a lot of jobs being created with the projects that are going on right now. To give you an idea, Louisiana has $4 billion available this year for these sorts of river and coastal restoration projects. So all of those sediment projects and wetland restoration projects, all those are producing real jobs and real opportunities for people right now, and growing new skill sets and creating new capacity for the workforce.
I appreciate that. Reskilling has been said a lot. It's a new hot word out there because upskilling was kind of like implying that wherever skill you were, it was down below something. So we have a lot of reskilling and retraining and a lot of really cool opportunities, including dietary changes in communities to kind of like we were saying, eating invaders and finding new ways of working with the ecosystems that we have. That's wonderful, though. Anybody else have any questions for our guests?
Well, if I could, I'd love to speak to that point that Max made about what are we going, or how are we going to be sustaining, especially like catching the fish or whatnot. And it made me think of what you were saying, Chef, as far as we have to be real about some of this stuff. Consuming ahi tuna at the rate that we're consuming ahi tuna is really not sustainable. And it's going to be something that we're going to have to say goodbye to. or at least it's going to become something that is rare to the point that most people can't afford it. It's not a farmable fish as far as I understand it. They swim far too far, they're way too muscular. But what we do have is a lot of other fish that can fill that void, other fish that do taste great, they're fresh, they're clean, they work into that. And so I think a lot of it comes down to using what is there. As the acidity of the ocean changes, as the temperature changes, there's going to be a lot of movement. And if we're adaptable to that change, we're going to have a harvest of good food from the ocean. Will it always be our favorite? Not necessarily. And I mean, ahi is something that is a lot of people's favorite. And it's just like, I don't know that all of it's sustainable, but there is a lot of those opportunities, and a lot of invaders are delicious. So you can't really throw you can't really throw that into the wind.
Yeah. I think that's one of the challenges that I'm having currently as we're trying to build out all these menus with new ways of eating that will be less impactful or actually make a positive impact where we're actually wiping an invasive species, even, a quarter mile at a time. And having something delicious. And actually, one of our previous guests, Shelby Smith, spoke to this with her cricket snacks was, hey, if I want you to try crickets, they better be damn delicious. And so she worked really, really hard on making really delicious foods. And like you said, there are invaders that are delicious. We need to find them, and we need to find a different way to make those delicious recipes like the ahi tuna poke. I mean, maybe 6 years ago, I remember posting something where I was like, "What are we gonna do to tuna populations if this poke shop revolution?" I mean, it's like a disease. It's just on every block now in Austin. It just got hot, so everything is poke all over the place. We're doing a butternut squash recipe for vegans right now that's really, really popular, because butternut squash has a solid little texture, and once you cool it down, it retains a little bit more firmness, and it's got a lot of sweetness to it. So by trying to come up with different substitutions, and then we also have all these new protein companies that are coming along that I'm sure Deep Blue is probably unearthing out there as well, where we can just start replacing and letting these ecosystems, because what we do know, like you said with the salmon, any of these species will surprise you the way they bounce back as we continue to nourish and give back, and maybe take a little bit less. I think we can really do some amazing things and keep people employed.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that Louisiana is fortunate is that in terms of the ecosystem of the bayou and the shrimp and the crawfish and the crabs and all that come out of there, to my knowledge, there are no issues about the numbers or any sort of in danger, et cetera. There have been issues once upon a time when everybody was eating black and red fish. They had a problem with the redfish population, but even that, I think they've got a handle on that. So there's lots of things that in that sort of rich delta environment, there's so many. They actually they call it the pantry, because that's where all the food comes from. And of course, Louisiana food, Cajun food, Creole food is famous all over the world, and it's quite abundant there. So I think it's one of the positive stories that we don't have too much of an issue, to my knowledge, of species in danger in the bayou. But then to your point about other sources, from my seasteading days, I know that there is an algae type that is being grown that actually tastes like bacon. So if we can have bacon tasting algae, that's a pretty good alternative. So there's some good news on the horizon.
Yeah. I just got some dulce, I think was one of the varietals that you can fry, and I really, really enjoyed it. I also learned a lesson about other seaweeds where you have to like soak them and not try to eat them straight out of the package, so you'll never make that mistake twice. Um, but it's been such a wonderful learning experience, and I really think that as people start to understand, and I think the younger generations are really a little bit more conscious of it now. They're like, whoa, they've grown up with a little bit more information. Like Ivan was saying, he's got kids who are coding in class and doing all kinds of things. The information that they get is instantaneous. And what we definitely have learned is that we can either nourish or starve our ecosystems depending on the efforts that we put in. And I think we need to be conscious of how we go forward in our lives.
Without a doubt.
Well, thanks, y'all, and thank you for joining me. This has been just absolutely enlightening. Unbelievable what y'all are accomplishing out there. And Ivan, I can't wait to see what your students in the next generations continue to accomplish.
Nor I. I'm looking forward to it. They surprise me all the time.
We'll probably catch them doing all kinds of amazing things with Greg, too.
Yeah, it was great to be here. Really appreciate the opportunity to share some of these ideas, and great to meet you, Ivan.
Very nice meeting you too, Greg.
Thank you all.
Woo!
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Arthur C. Clarke Presents metaFUTURES. With special thanks to our host, Chef Olivia Hernandez of Nambar, Dr. Jerica Hackaday Thompson from Texas Allied Health, Greg Delaune from the Blue Futures Institute, and Fisherman Ivan Winkler. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, theme music would be great.
It's out there. It's on.
Not 100% sure who to look at or what to